Good evening. All right, we're going to try that one more time. Good evening. Much better. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, I'd like to welcome you aboard the Queen Mary. Yeah, let's give it up. Without a doubt, that is the first time that phrase has ever come out of my mouth. I have yet to welcome a group aboard a boat, so that is very unique. I would like to specifically thank the Queen Mary and their staff for having us here this evening. Please, let's give it up for them. My name's John Cohn. I'm the managing producer of forum programs and live events for KPCC. We have an entire platform dedicated to in-person convenings just like this, and we're really excited to be here to talk about the future of ports in LA, which I think we all know by evidence of the fact that you're all sitting here and so many people came out for this is an incredibly important and complex topic, so I can think of no one better to talk about that than AirTalk and Larry Mantle. I'd also like to specifically thank SoCal Gas. SoCal Gas is the sponsor of our AirTalk 30th Anniversary Regional Tour. We couldn't do it without them. Please give it up for SoCal Gas. Thank you. Tonight marks halfway through our tour. We're already 6 events in with tonight's program, and we're going to be doing more convening around Southern California on the most important topics, conversations, and things that engage the public in meaningful dialogue and face-to-face conversation. I'm on a script. Larry won't be on a script. It gets much better after this. 14 years ago, now you know I'm like really winding up. 14 years ago, KPCC was one of the least listened to public radio stations in the country. Yes, just 14 years ago, right? And actually, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was on the verge of eliminating our funding. Around that time, a board from American Public Media said, let's start Southern California Public Radio. They poached the then senior vice president of content from NPR to come out and start SCPR and bring KPCC to the future. Now, fast forward 14 years, KPCC's audience is now, wait for it, the largest public radio audience in the country. Our newsroom is the 2nd largest newsroom in Los Angeles and the 3rd largest in Southern California. And we've been able to accomplish a great deal of that due to Larry Mantle's leadership and guidance for 30 years of being on the air, and also, most importantly, by the support of people like you, which is now where I make it really fun. So by a show of hands, how many of you are members of KPCC? All right, great. So thank you to everybody who raised your hand. You make what we do possible. If you didn't raise your hand, hopefully some of you will get this joke. Please call 866-888-5722 or click and join at kpcc.org now. That support makes what we do possible. We're a mission-driven news organization. Our mission, to provide the highest quality news and public affairs programming in SoCal and to create opportunities like this to engage in dialogues that absolutely have to happen. Okay, enough of that. So, housekeeping. Please put your devices on silent, but we do encourage you to participate in social media. All the Twitter stuff is over here. KPCC Forum, AirTalk, hashtag. That would be hashtag AT30. And thank you again to our sponsor, SoCal Gas. KPCC's president, Bill Davis, is really fond of saying that Larry has become the civic soul of Los Angeles. And I have to say that most of us at KPCC are absolutely inclined to agree with him, and it's an honor to consider him a colleague. So I hope that tonight you will join me in welcoming your host for the evening and the host of AirTalk, Larry Mantle.
John, thank you so much. I really appreciate those words. And above and beyond that, what John and his team has done, thank you, is has gone to all these venues as part of our AirTalk 30th Anniversary Tour to try and find the best places. And that's not easy. Where the size is right, there's kind of a feeling of intimacy, a sense of history is better yet, and a place that people want to come to because it's beautiful. And John hit the jackpot with the Queen Mary tonight. This room is spectacular. And he worked very hard to make that so. So, Jon, I deeply appreciate it. I know how many miles you've put on your car driving hither and yon from Santa Barbara out to Redlands, down to South Orange County, to give us an opportunity with these 30th anniversary shows to really cover our listening area. 20 years ago, we did a similar tour. The venues were a little smaller. People that came out were very, very excited to be able to support the program and the station, but our crowds have grown a lot in 10 years, and that's very exciting to see. And I think it's a testament to how interested people are in Southern California about their communities, about the issues that we all care about, whether it's the port complex of Long Beach and Los Angeles, or whether last week our conversation on Silicon Beach and the future of the tech industry. We're in Santa Monica. Next month we'll be in North Hollywood to talk about the impact of the minimum wage. How's it going to affect restaurants? How is it going to be phased in? What are businesses' decisions going to be about how to accommodate paying a higher minimum wage, particularly in those smaller businesses where that's where many of their employees are. So thank you for coming out, supporting 30 years, supporting the program. This is, of course, a radio broadcast as well as a web stream. So one of the ways that you can really support it tonight is with your enthusiasm, with your applause, giving a real sense of place that we're doing the program with a live audience and showing that enthusiasm to people who are going to listen to the broadcast tomorrow at noon on KPCC. So I'll give you a little nod or a little cue. So if you feel it, please applaud. Public radio audience, I know, if you're not into it, that's okay. But if you're feeling that Tonight Show vibe, go for it. Well, let me introduce our panelists who are going to talk with us about the future of the port complex here in Los Angeles and Long Beach. We put together an all-star panel to really talk about the complexity of challenges that the ports face. Let me introduce first the Vice President of the Los Angeles Harbor Commission, Dave Arian. Dave. We'll get them all situated with the microphones with Dave McKeever, who is our head engineer for the broadcast. Next is the Vice President of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association in Long Beach, T.L. Garrett. T.L.? Also with us, the President of Local 13 of the International Longshore Warehouse Union, Bobby Olvera, Jr. Next is the President and CEO of the Port of Long Beach, Jon Slangerup. We also have representing the truckers, Nick Weiner, who is the campaign director for Justice for Port Drivers of the Teamsters Port Division. Nick Weiner. Our environmental voice for the conversation from the Natural Resources Defense Council, Staff Attorney Morgan Wyenn. And our final guest is joining us, just running a little late because of a teaching commitment, and that'll be Goetz Wolff, who is at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, economist, lecturer on urban planning, and someone very well versed in the challenges and environment of the port. So Goetz will be with us as we're on the fly here, perhaps at the first break in our conversation. So it looks like we are all set with our microphones, and I think we are ready to roll. Oh, I need my timer. Otherwise, I won't know where to take a break. So we're doing this, what we call live to tape, even though we stopped using actual tape about 10 years or so ago. But the term stays. So what we're doing is 3 different segments. 13 minutes, 17 minutes, 17 minutes, and that'll be just as it's heard on tomorrow's program. Then once we're done with the broadcast, if you have questions you'd like to ask our panelists, we're going to take a few minutes afterwards. We'll have you come up to a microphone, and I'll prep you a little bit for that part of our program tonight. So that's to come. All right, Dave, we are ready whenever you are. Good to go. All right. From the RMS, Queen Mary in Long Beach, this is AirTalk on the Road, a 30th anniversary special. I'm Larry Mantle. We're in the Art Deco splendor of the Queen's Salon of this 1936 ship. As we sit in what represented the pinnacle of luxury sailing, we'll contemplate the grittier world of Long Beach and Los Angeles' port complex. Now, though the two ports are still the largest in the country, their combined share of total shipping are dropping. About a third of the country's shipping comes through here. That's more than 4,400 ships a year. And during the work impasse, the labor impasse, it seemed about half of those were sitting off the coast, didn't it? So it's a lot of containers that come through this complex. Competition from East Coast and Gulf ports has increased. British Columbia is a bigger player. And next year's completed widening of the Panama Canal will only make it easier for ships to head straight east, bypassing our ports, going to the Gulf, going to the East Coast ports. So those problems and possible solutions are our focus this evening. Let me introduce our panelists. With me, Dave Arian, the Vice President of the LA Harbor Commission, T.L. Garrett, Vice President of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association in Long Beach, Bobby Olvera Jr., President, Local 13, International Longshore Warehouse Union, Jon Slangerup, President, CEO, the Port of Long Beach, Nick Weiner, Campaign Director for Justice for Port Drivers, Goetz Wolff, UCLA School of Public Affairs economist and lecturer, and Morgan Wyenn, Staff Attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council. So let's begin by just getting a sense of the importance of the ports to the local economy. Dave Arian, let me start with you. What are we talking about in terms of the ripple effect of the economy of this complex, not just direct jobs, but the impact of being a shipping hub?
Well, you know, when you look at industry in this country, there's very little of it left, but this is a hub for economic growth, particularly in Southern California. Millions of people throughout the United States work as a direct result of these two ports. So this is an important thing. I know we have somebody here from the Longshore Union, but just in wages alone, the longshoremen invest nearly $1.2 billion in Southern California economy.
Bobby, you want to talk about it in terms of directly what it means for people who work at the ports?
I think for the individuals that work in the ports, they've invested in this community. And the wages that they earn here in the port get spent in the community. And they have a unique perspective because both they live here, so the environment is important to them, congestion on the highways is important to them, but the ability to have a good middle-class income, put their kids through college, pay their taxes, I think that's foremost in their minds.
Jon Slangerup, Port of Long Beach, give us a sense of the importance of this port to the city of Long Beach, which operates the port.
Well, for the city, which is about 500,000 people, we employ through the port about 1 out of 8 jobs. So it's a significant impact on our community. And of course, regionally, there's about 300,000 jobs that are directly affected by the work that goes on at the Port of Long Beach.
Goetz Wolff, UCLA, let me ask you just about the overall economic impact of the ports. We've seen manufacturing decline in Southern California. With the growth of the ports, has that in any respect sort of helped to counterbalance that, or are these very different economic contributions?
Actually, they're dual elements to it. And once, ironically, the ports have allowed more product to be manufactured offshore to come in a sense, to undermine manufacturing, which is a tragedy. On the other hand, the fact that the industry as a whole provides so many jobs for the region really is important, although I think it's really significant to make a distinction between the types of jobs that exist, ranging from the very well-paid and deservedly well-paid longshoremen to people who are the port truckers or the people who are working in the distribution centers, which provide jobs, but certainly not the kind of jobs that you or I or our family would want to work at.
Now, the truck driving jobs at the port, are these jobs that pay comparable to what truck drivers who aren't associated with the port make, or do they make less?
No, they make less. I think one of the real issues is that the nature of the port trucking system is one which has relied upon a legal fiction that the truck drivers are independent owner-operators, which makes them seem as if they were totally entrepreneurs and businessmen, but really they are in effect captive workers responding to the immediate demands of the various trucking companies that hire them. There are a few exceptions, companies that do have regular employees, but in most cases these truckers work on a basis of the load that they carry. So they are not paid by the hour, but they're paid by the load. So any kind of delays are adversely affecting them, and they are responsible for the huge amount of maintenance that's required for the trucks as well.
Nick Weiner, let me ask you about that part of it. I mean, can someone go buy a truck and just go into business for themselves and start delivering loads from the docks?
Well, that's been the traditional model for port trucking, but that changed a few years ago when the ports implemented this clean truck program that required new diesel and alternative fuel trucks to gain access at the port. So that's really turned the trucking industry on its head. Companies had to buy thousands of trucks in just a couple of years. But you still have the situation that gets just described, where companies bought the trucks, but then they tell the drivers, if you want a job, you have to lease the truck, and then they make them pay for the fuel, the insurance, all the lease payments. So there's been millions of dollars in wage theft perpetrated on the 10 or 12,000 truck drivers who haul in and out of the port every day.
You're calling it wage theft, but it is legal, right?
Well, actually, no. Over the last 3 or 4 years, multiple government agencies have begun investigations, and every single one, from the U.S. Department of Labor to the California Labor Commissioner to the California EDD that enforces unemployment taxes, have all said that, no, actually, the model is illegal. It is wage theft. These companies, these drivers aren't independent contractors. They're actually misclassified employees. And so that's created a huge amount of financial liability. And that's a ticking time bomb for this industry, is to get these companies to start complying with the law.
Because there's still a demand for truckers in this country away from the ports. So if truckers aren't making money, why are they working the ports instead of driving trucks for other businesses where they'd make more money?
Well, you know, the National Trucking Association, recently I was back in Washington, D.C. in front of the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, and they were testifying, and they put out a statistic that said that 20% of port truckers leave every year because they can't make a living nationally. And that's a reality, I think. And I didn't know that, but that, you know, that was put out by the National Trucking Association. And it creates an instability in this industry, and it has to be resolved.
But I'd just like to add, look, over the last several years, there's been huge unemployment in this country. There aren't choices for these truck drivers. These are the jobs that exist, and they're a necessary job. Cargo from the ports here, I think, go to every congressional district in the country. Everyone in this nation depends on the port, including these truck drivers, so they should be good jobs.
Let's talk about the possible impact of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The President Obama is wanting to see passed to ease trade with Pacific Rim countries. Go back to Goetz Wolff, the economist, on this. What impact, if any, do you see that having on the port complex here?
Actually, not that much, because the transformation that the Trans-Pacific Partnership involves is more related to intellectual property, financial issues, things of that sort. The opening up of trade due to lowering tariffs and things of that sort have been taking place over the years. And there is no grand, it's not like the famous sucking sound that we heard about when the NAFTA was passed. In a sense, the sucking is already taking place, and it won't make that much of a difference in this particular configuration. It'll be a big difference for other kinds of undertakings, but I don't think it's much on the ports.
Morgan Wyenn of Natural Resources Defense Council. I know that for NRDC and other environmental groups, the ports have been a huge concern. Diesel emissions from ships, impact on local communities, idling trucks. I mean, it's a long list of things that you've been concerned about. The ports have both touted how much they've cleaned up their act. How far do you think they've gone? What do you see now as the biggest environmental challenge of the complex?
I think it's definitely a 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of situation. I think no one can deny that both ports have shown incredible leadership and are a model for many ports around the world, and we have applauded them and supported a lot of their efforts. On the other hand, there's a huge amount of work left to go. The port environmental pollution problem is complicated and very expensive to fix, and I think we're still a long way from the solution. I think in terms of the future, the next step that everyone agrees is transitioning to zero-emission technologies in every sector at the port.
So what are the equipment? I mean, obviously trucks are a big part of this. What are some of the other pieces of equipment? All the ships, do they plug in now, or are not all of them able to plug in when they're at berth in the harbor?
Well, thankfully, due to port policies and the California Air Resources Board regulations, container ships, most of them are required or are rolling soon to be required to plug in, which is great. So that's when they're at berth.
So then cut those diesel engines for that time.
Exactly. But when they're coming and going from the port, obviously that's still a problem. And there's many ships out there who come to the port who do not plug in. And so there's definitely this race to find technology to capture those emissions while they're at berth.
And what about equipment on the docks? Are there a lot of gasoline-powered vehicles on the docks themselves you'd like to see become zero-emission vehicles?
Yes, definitely. I think there's a lot of great opportunities. For example, yard hostlers that move containers around, there's great opportunities for those to be electric. And of course, I think a huge piece of the pie that you mentioned is trucks, to transition those to be zero emissions and electric as well.
And now with the cleaner truck mandate, are most of them clean diesel, or how are most of the trucks configured now?
Well, thankfully, due to the Clean Truck program, the trucks are much, much cleaner than they used to be. But we have many problems due to maintenance issues, as been mentioned earlier on the panel, that the truck drivers often are left footing the bill to maintain these trucks, which is a very expensive endeavor. And so often maintenance is not done properly, both for safety and environmental issues. And so we don't have the filters working the way they should. So the trucks are not as clean as we all hoped that they were going to be. And I think also just transitioning them to be zero-emission trucks is going to be a huge financial investment, and we're going to need incentives and grants from every level of government and new incentive programs.
All right, when we come back, we're going to continue and talk about the huge competitive challenges that the ports are facing. Widening of the Panama Canal, that opens up other ports. After the labor impasse that happened last year, there was also a huge issue where other shippers were looking at alternatives so they wouldn't have to rely on LA and Long Beach. We'll talk about what the port complex here is trying to do to keep those shippers coming to Southern California. It's AirTalk's 30th anniversary tour. We're on the road from the Queen Mary, the beautiful Queen Salon. We'll continue right after this news update. I love Long Beach. You folks are into it. This is terrific. My mother lives here in Long Beach. In fact, part of the view from her place is of the Queen Mary, and she's here with a number of people who live in the condominium building that she's in from Long Beach. How many of you are Greater Long Beach residents from right in this community? All right, well over half. That's terrific. We have a great city. I spent a lot of time here. And absolutely love it. It's just great to see all the things that are going on here. So thanks for coming out. We'll continue with our second segment. From the 1936 showplace, the Queen Mary in Long Beach, this is AirTalk's 30th anniversary tour. When the Queen Mary arrived here in 1967, there were a lot of people scratching their heads. Why would a city in Southern California pay to relocate what was a British cultural and economic treasure and to bring it here in Long Beach? It's, of course, had an up and down history. But one thing that's undeniable is the history that's here, the beauty of the facility. You know, many of us have come here for all kinds of public events or to take tours or to stay in the hotel that's here on the ship. And we are very fortunate to have it right here in Long Beach in Southern California. We're talking about the future of the port complex of Long Beach and Los Angeles. We have a terrific panel that we put together to join us, including economist Goetz Wolff of UCLA, Morgan Wyenn of the Natural Resources Defense Council, Nick Weiner of the Teamsters Port Division, Jon Slangerup of the Port of Long Beach, Dave Arian, the LA Harbor Commission Vice President, T.L. Garrett of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association in Long Beach, and Bobby Olvera, Jr., President of the Local 13 International Longshore Warehouse Union. T.L., let me ask you about the shippers' perspective on this, because there's just so many different competitive opportunities in the field. What are shippers looking at beyond closeness to their markets?
They're looking for good infrastructure that will enable them to move the cargo most efficiently to get it to the marketplace. You have to view my members, the shipping lines and the terminal operators, as sort of a UPS. We don't own the cargo that's in the boxes, but we're responsible for getting it to the customer on time. And so from our perspective, what's most important is having the facilities at the ports that can meet those needs so that we can efficiently move the cargoes.
What are your biggest frustrations with these two ports?
The modernization process that is ever ongoing in both of these ports. They can continue to evolve, but some of the processes take an exceedingly long time to enable us to take full advantage of the modernization. There are projects that by the time that they're actually constructed, some of the technologies are already obsolete.
Why does it take so long?
It's the process within California. It's the CEQA process.
So environmental review.
It's
so
those checks and balances.
So
yes.
Let's take the example of the super container ships that are 2-3 times larger than the conventional size ships that are coming in. So the ports are retrofitting to be able to accommodate those. From where they knew, hey, they're building huge ships, how long did it take to actually start the process of adapting to that?
They're constantly adapting. The constant history of the port has been improving facilities to take the next generation of cargo. Channel
but you're
deepening.
Just saying it takes a long time.
It does. It takes decades.
Well, look, there's more to the port than just moving cargo. The port is a public entity owned by the citizens of the state of California and administrated, at least for us, by the city of Los Angeles. And so you have a responsibility to the public. In the Port of LA, I call it the 100-Year War, where the port was not receptive to the needs of the community. So the NRDC and other environmentalists filed lawsuits, legitimately so, and stopped any construction project for 7 years, And the port had to adjust to that. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa and our present mayor addressed that question. And now, I think we're moving in a positive direction. But still, if we were to start a project today, just to get it through all the different regulations, it would take 2 to 3 years. When the Chinese decided to build out of Shanghai, they built a bridge 23 miles across the water. They redid an island, and within 4 years, we're moving 5 million cans on that terminal. It took 4 years.
So 4 years, including the entire, from the idea to the bridge opens.
It would be like us building a bridge from here to Catalina, which would take 50 years. So it's not going to happen.
I understand what you're saying about being a good steward for the city, in your case of LA or for Long Beach. But, I hear from listeners all the time about LAX, for example. Well, didn't people know they're moving in next to an airport that serves millions of people in Southern California? And so for people to be complaining who live next to an airport that they live next to an airport, Or, as listeners would say about the port, for people to complain who live in Wilmington, Long Beach, and San Pedro about living next to a port, that doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So, yeah, what's your response to say, this really, it is a business and needs to be operated as a business, and nearby residents have to deal with that?
Yeah, but you can grow the port and you can grow it green, and that's a difference today than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and that's what we have to do.
But you're saying green takes years and years to do it.
But, you know, you have to consider the needs of the community. We have no choice. This is America. This is not China, okay? It's different in this country, thankfully.
How are other ports doing it much... How are other ports in the United States doing it much more quickly than you?
They're not. They're not. There's a process
Savannah,
that goes on.
these other...
Well, Savannah is different because they're an operating port, and an operating port has more control. We're a landlord port, as most ports are here in California. So there's a difference. But I think the real question here is, when they can build a ship, a monster ship that moves 100 times as much cargo as before within 1 year, there's no way to adjust to that overnight. And that's the problem. The problem has been created by the industry itself. The blame always goes on labor, goes on ports, but it was created by the industry itself to be more competitive, to lower the cost of shipping a container. And that's really what's created by the industry. How do we solve it? We're working on it.
TL, so let's talk about that. So for the shippers, there's huge economies of scale. You save on fuel. There are all kinds of advantages with these mammoth ships that are now being constructed. Did the industry do anything to try and make sure that ports were going to be ready to get these ships before they fast-track building them?
Obviously, there's interaction that goes on between the terminal operators, the shipping lines, and the ports to make sure that when their vessel arrives, it can be accommodated. One of the factors with the newer generations of vessels, they haven't necessarily needed deeper channels than previous generations, so some of the work that had been done prior to this already accommodates those newer, larger ships. But the economies of scales are huge, and the environmental benefits of those economies of scale and maximizing that. I mean, it's just this has always been the most environmentally efficient way of moving cargo on the planet. We continue to evolve, and this is another major step in that evolution.
Bobby Olvera, yeah, I was just going to go to you from the
I think I have to take offense to that in a sense of, I don't think that the marine terminal operators in the industry did nearly enough to get the ports ready. We've known for years that these larger ships were coming in, and what we saw was a lack of investment in training of the longshoremen, a lack of investment on hiring. It's been 7 years since we've hired. We didn't prepare for peak, and that's a phrase that I've gotten from Jon. But the terminals haven't restriped their pads. When you're bringing in more cargo, you have to prepare the facility for more cargo. If I'm going to buy more groceries, I got to have the room in the cupboards, and that's what the marine terminal operators in the ports haven't done.
So why do you think the problem is? It simply bureaucracy, lack of leadership? What do you think the problem is?
I think one word is simple. It's greed. I think that they'd rather expend their money on unproven technologies that, even in the recent days, we've had marine terminal operators come to us and say, listen, our technology is not working. We can't say it publicly, but it's not working. Help us. And what we've done is we've gone back to a traditional sense of working on the waterfront. More labor intensive, but we're seeing triple, quadruple the amount of moves and the efficiency that we did with the failed technology. So I think they've invested in the wrong thing. They should have been investing in human capital, hiring people, providing more full-time workers so that when we do hit peak, the people are there to work.
Well, without getting too technical, can you give us an example of one of these newer technologies that proved it couldn't do the job?
There's locating systems. If you can imagine a bunch of shoe boxes piled up, six piles, some of them going up 5 high, some going 1 and 2 high. These technologies are supposed to identify where the containers are within the piles, so it may tell a crane operator, go and pick up in the number 3 pile the middle can. Well, he gets to the number 3 pile and he digs out a few cans, and well, that's not the right container. So then the trucker is left to say, that's not my container, I don't want it. The computer doesn't know any different. It's working off of a GPS. Then they have to go and call a marine clerk, and human intervention is needed. So what they've seen now is the systems don't work, so they'll just put a human out there. They'll put a marine clerk and to work with the crane operator to identify the can immediately. Truck A pulls up, I need can 1, 2, 3. There's can 1, 2, 3.
And that's not a human input error in the technology. You're saying it's a GPS reading of what that container is supposed to have in it, and it's wrong.
Correct. If you take a picture of your china cabinet, you don't move a lot of things in that china cabinet. Things are going to stay put.
Jon Slangerup of Port of Long Beach, you want to respond to that?
Well, I think that the technology he's referring to is something that the terminal operators invest in and perfect. I can tell you this, that the entire supply chain, including the ocean carriers and the terminal operators, are part of a very disparate system. It's not a connected, integrated supply chain. And because of that, there is a dearth of information that drives visibility of the move of a container from origin all the way through to destination, being the warehouse. We have invested an enormous amount of time in addressing the entire supply chain, and that's the next great opportunity for the ports and for all of our stakeholders in that supply chain.
Well, just a few days ago, didn't you set up several task forces to deal with this supply chain challenge?
Yeah, we have, and it's a fundamental shift. This is a very, very interesting time in the evolution of the marine supply chain and shipping industry. The big ships have fundamentally changed everything, but we have not yet responded holistically to that challenge. In Long Beach, we've invested an enormous amount of money, and I have to say, just to challenge the thinking a little bit, these big ships have arrived. 14,000 TEU vessels or container vessels are coming to our piers every day, and we handle those. We've been preparing for years for this, and we have invested billions of dollars to do it. So I don't want your listeners to think that we're sitting here waiting for these big ships to come and not be prepared. We're totally prepared.
No, but one of the things that, of course, we hear about this is that because of the way the containers are stacked differently on these super ships, that it's much harder to be able to unload them in a logical fashion because stuff is all mixed up. It's loaded on different places in different order. So in trying to get the supply system all squared away, do you have any leverage with the shippers to get it into a more logical sort of system, or find ways to deal with the way those containers are now stacked?
Yeah, of course we do, and we're doing that. The ocean carriers, all of them who are our partners, acknowledge the fact that these big ships have introduced unintended consequences into the supply chain, and it's a very serious set of complex issues. But it begins with the loading of containers aboard the vessel at origin, say in a port in China or Singapore, anywhere. And these big ships, which are at least twice as large as what was sailing 4 years ago, and these 14,000 container-sized vessels are soon to be replaced by 16 and 18,000 this decade. And very likely by the end of this decade, we're going to see 21,000 TEU vessels visiting our port. So the impact of these vessels are enormous. But when you're trying to load these vessels, what it's done is it's fundamentally changed the competitive set within the industry, where numbers of former competitors, ocean carriers that competed in the business, are now aligning or forming alliances where they actually use these mega ships as a means to cut their costs and improve their efficiency of their operations.
Well, it sounds like they're not working together organizationally, so each of these companies in the alliance is dumping their stuff onto the ship, and then you got to make sense of it when it arrives in LA or Long Beach.
But you have to understand too that to me, half the problem is a learning curve. I liken it to the airline industry when these mega airliners were introduced into the system. It was great because the fuel burn, everything about it was great until they landed it at the airport and they disgorged 500 passengers at a time. There was no infrastructure to handle that. So within a year's time, they were handling it. And the same thing will happen with us. I mean,
how long for you to handle it?
Well, it took us 6 weeks to handle it. We were terribly congested, and once we had labor fully back at work, it took us 6 weeks to clear the backlog, and we saw record productivity. So I'm not worried about our ability to react and respond to the big ships. We're already ready.
Dave Arian.
I think there's been two revolutions on the waterfront, and we're going through the second one right now. The first one was when we handled cargo, went into containers. The container revolution happened in the early 60s. And for the audience, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent container.
So some containers are 1 TEU, some are 2, is that
Well,
right?
what it is a 40-foot container is really 2 TEUs. So when we talk about a TEU, just for the audience, we're talking about a metrics that determines how many containers are on a ship. But what's really happened, the second revolution is really being introduced on the basis of the bigger ships, a different method of competition, and that we're a consumer economy now. Everything's coming in. And I think that's the second thing. The other thing is we have been preparing for these big ships. We started dredging the port of Los Angeles to 51 feet, 6 years ago, and we completed it a year and a half ago. There's only a few ports in the country who can handle these bigger ships. And the most important thing is the the Panama Canal can only handle 14,000 TEU ships. They're going to be outdated within a year or two because the ships are getting even bigger than that.
Maybe they'll just keep digging and make a wider...
Nicaragua, I think it is.
All right, we're going to continue. I want to hear from more of you, though, about how to meet these challenges, because the fact is market share is eroding. There's still, because shipping is growing, more freight is coming through here, but it's still losing market position. So we'll talk about those challenges. We're coming your way from the Queen Mary, the beautiful Queen Salon, 30th anniversary AirTalk on the Road tour. We'll be back with more about the future of the port complex of LA and Long Beach right after this news update. So be thinking about your questions, because we only have one more segment that's of the radio broadcast, which means there are all kinds of things that I don't have time to get to, but maybe you have questions you'd like to ask. So be thinking of them, and we'll take some of those questions after this next segment of the program. All right, Dave, are we good to go? All right, thank you, sir. From the beautiful Queen Mary in Long Beach, it's AirTalk's 30th anniversary on the road special. Ooh. I'm Larry Mantle. Great to have you with us. A very beautiful evening as you're listening to this on KPCC. Hope it's as nice a day as it was last night when we talked with the Queen Mary about the challenges facing the LA and Long Beach port complex. Let me reintroduce our panelist, Dave Arian, who was the Vice President of the LA Harbor Commission, T.L. Garrett, Vice President of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association in Long Beach, Bobby Olvera Jr., President Local 13 of the International Longshore Warehouse Union, Jon Slangerup, President, CEO of the Port of Long Beach. Nick Weiner is the Campaign Director for Justice for Port Drivers and is with the Teamsters Port Division. Goetz Wolff, economist and lecturer at UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs. He's an expert on the economy of the port complex. And Morgan Wyenn, staff attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council. So let's talk about some of the other challenges even away from the port complex. We've got a freeway system that's jammed. We've got Alameda Corridor that's trying to take some of the freight that comes through. We've got trucks that are idling here at the port to take it away. Let me go with you, Goetz Wolff, to talk about some of the other just infrastructure bottlenecks that make it difficult.
I really feel it's important, as significant as the port is itself, or the ports, in bringing all this together. It's tunnel vision only to focus on the issue of the ports. There is that significant issue of if you have more containers and more goods, that means they have to get out of the area. And the two basic ways are either through rail, in some cases on-dock rail, which is perhaps one of the most efficient ways for doing so, but that's limited because it only really is economically efficient for 600, 700 miles out. So it doesn't do any good to put containers on rail if they're going to Las Vegas, if they're going into the huge regional market of Southern California. The other way is through port trucking. And the port trucking is perhaps one of the greatest challenges we have. We have an expert here, Nick Weiner, who can talk more in detail about the condition of truckers. But the larger issue is the amount of traffic that this generates, and we need to expand our horizon to recognize the impact it has on the inland empire. Those folks with all those distribution centers and wholesale houses and so on, those people are severely impacted by the movement of goods and the transformation of the region into largely low-wage jobs. Those are things which are an integral part of the system, which I think sometimes we neglect.
And I understand you're saying they're low-wage jobs, and ideally people would be paid more than the warehouse jobs can pay. But we got a serious problem in this country with not enough jobs for people who don't have college educations. So isn't it better of the realistic alternatives to have lower wage warehouse jobs so at least people have jobs than folks without college degrees being unemployed?
Yours is a compelling argument, but it also ensures a downward spiral, because we could perhaps say we should try to meet the wage rate of Haiti or of Bangladesh. The real issue is what quality are jobs, and those jobs can be improved. Historically in the United States, we did have the experience in the 1930s, people working in the automobile industry, and they weren't particularly highly skilled, and they were at the bottom end of the wage structure. Through unionization, they were able to convince management that they deserved better wages. And so people who had lower skills and ultimately grew in skills because their wages warranted increased skills was a way of improving that situation. I suggest that we really need to have sort of a high road vision rather than the low road, which says anytime there's an issue of cost, it has to go on, the burden has to go on the workers.
As you know, in this country, Los Angeles Times just did a great story on this a couple days ago. You know a lot more about this than I do, but there's this tremendous demand for specially trained workers to work in industries that have, specialized kinds of trade education. And we don't have enough people to move into those jobs.
Were all those jobs in large enough number to accommodate people? I assure you that the gap between those kind of high-skilled jobs and the number of jobs and the number of people looking for jobs are a mismatch. I think we're mistaken if we assume that all the new jobs are going to be high skill. We're going to continue to have a whole range of jobs which are lower skilled, and the question is, in our society, what values do we place more highly? Getting something cheaply, or having a society with people well off?
Well, with more technology, the question is, how many of those jobs are we going to have going forward? And you're going to see this at the port, right? Where it's going to become more and more mechanized. Jobs of people that work in the ports are going to become more and more at risk, the effort to bring down costs. So this, how we employ people in these kinds of technical industries is going to be an ongoing challenge. I see.
But Larry, there's a reason that the longshoreman jobs are good jobs at the port. Those workers have a union. Bobby represents them. The warehouse workers, the truck drivers don't have a union. Port drivers are struggling and fighting for many years to get a union. They've started to turn that corner just in the last few months, where there's a few hundred Teamster port drivers that are now making $21 an hour, have a pension, have medical insurance. But I've seen too many paychecks from too many drivers like Daniel Linares and Amador Rojas, who work for one of the leading port trucking companies, Pac 9. At the ports, where they work 60, 70 hours a week, haul many TEUs, many cans, but at the end of the week, they come home with $100, zero. I've seen paychecks where they owe their employer $100, $200, $300 because the deductions that are taken out of their paycheck for fuel, for insurance, are more than they were paid. It's outrageous, and we can do so much better, and that's why these drivers are coming together. They've been going on strike. They're suing their companies because they want a union, they want a good job, and we can do that.
All right, let me bring T.L. Garrett back into this. So, from the shipper's standpoint, if drivers were all unionized, they all made more money than they do now, would that have any impact on the business at the port? In
my opinion, no. The truckers are the customers of our members. And just like any customer, we want to make sure that we provide them with the best experience possible. Now, there are problems out there. The big ships are driving problems. But we also have natural advantages, the infrastructure that Dave Arian mentioned, but also we have a tremendous marketplace here. You know, don't underestimate the power of the marketplace in Southern California. Bringing the ships.
And the appeal to your members is obviously huge, and you can truck to millions of people in a short distance. What are the things that your members gives them pause about LA and Long Beach and that would make them look elsewhere?
The infrastructure is a huge consideration. We're looking at things like as we move towards technologies, increased electrification, the reliability and the predictability of the grid becomes more and more important. So we're looking at that kind of support to make sure that we can move the cargoes efficiently.
Are you saying that the electrical grid is unreliable at the port?
The electrical grid is antiquated throughout the nation. This is a national imperative that we need to get serious about. If we are going to make this transition to the next generation of technologies, we are going to have the infrastructure to support it, and we don't have it today.
You know,
Dave Arian.
I think if we're looking to the future, you know, we're looking at a different model. And we're looking at a model where a container comes into a terminal and it stays there no more than 24 hours. You create satellite terminals where you can move the containers more efficiently, and the question of efficiency is going to be the determination of where cargo flows, because that determines cost. And for the Port of LA and for the Port of Long Beach, it's a question of efficiencies and how we get there. With Jon in Long Beach and with our director, Gene Soroka, these two guys were brought in because they understand that. Along with labor, the shipping industry, for the first time, you're beginning to have some cooperation where the whole logistical chain is meeting together to address these problems. And the two new port directors have created the conditions to do that.
I hear what you're saying, and yet I read about drivers coming to the port, and they need a particular kind of chassis to put a container on. And they're driving around from dock to dock because they can't find the chassis that they need, and wasting all that time. The meter's running for them, for which they're not getting paid unless they are employed as a full-time worker for a company. So how does stuff like that happen?
That's an old story, though.
You know, if I could,
Yeah.
I think the main problem with that was what we saw for the past 2 generations was the steamship lines and the marine terminal operators owned their own chassis. So they had those chassis on their facility ready to go. And for a reason still that kind of befuddle a lot of people, but I think mostly it was to escape the jurisdiction of the longshoremen who are entitled to fix those chassis. They sold off all this equipment. So where APL or Maersk Line used to own their chassis, and they could afford that service to their customers, that when their container came in, it was a chassis ready for it.
They provide the chassis along with the container.
They sold off their assets, and I think that they were naive to think that once you sell off an asset, that the people you sell it off to aren't going to expect a premium when they lease it back to you.
So whose job is it to fix it now that it's a mess?
Well, we have fixed it, and we've addressed the entire chassis issue at the ports by actually getting these commercial owners and operators of chassis to work together as a team. And in fact, we now have what we call a pool of pools, which is an interoperable fleet of chassis where a trucker can pick up at one location and drop that same chassis at another location, even the other port, without any problem. And the chassis owner gets paid, the trucker is able to get billed efficiently.
Nick Weiner, has it been fixed?
Look, there's been problems with chassis, for decades. There's always a new problem that comes along every few years regarding congestion. The drivers have been stuck on the bottom for 35 years since trucking was deregulated in this country. Before then, they were all Teamsters. The real underlying problem is an inadequate, weak trucking sector. When you compare our trucking to the steamship lines and the terminals, for the steamship lines, you've got 4 alliances, 16 companies that control 80% of the world's cargo. But you look at the trucking companies, there's 600 of them that employ 12,000 drivers. The average trucking company is like 16 drivers. How can they compete? How can they do business with these giant global corporations, of course they're going to be stuck on the bottom. So the real issue is, while every other sector in the port economy has consolidated, the trucking sector has not, and not kept up, and not been able to modernize, not been able to negotiate fair rates, not been able, so we have too many unnecessary trucks coming in and out of the port because you've got such fragmentation and small companies hustling to find those chassis, find those containers.
Of course, the flip side of that is if everything as you'd like was unionized and they're all, contracts with these companies, that would give the drivers less flexibility. And there might be some who would prefer to have the flexibility, make their own deal.
We've already got that at the terminals. I mean, you want an efficient terminal. You want people who show up to work every day. I think that's what drivers want. They want security.
Okay.
They want a fair paycheck for working hard every day.
Bobby Olvera, Jr. of the Longshoremen, with the last labor impasse, there are a lot of members of the public who aren't real sympathetic to the members of your union. They look at half of your full-timers making 6 figures or more. A lot of people working on the docks making, $200,000. And they look at that and they think, well, I don't make that kind of money. I don't get the full benefits, all the things that come to your members. Given that and the fact that there's going to be an effort to drive down costs and to mechanize, are you concerned long-term about the future of your members' employment?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd love to see a $200,000 paycheck because I've never seen one. So I think those numbers are skewed tremendously. We make a good living. We were able to take care of our families, and I think that's a model for the American dream. Looking forward, I think the ILW is in a perfect situation right now. We're the best at what we do, and I've challenged 2 governors that have come to California trying to poach work from us and told them, longshoremen, you pick a ship, a cargo, I'll bring my guys, you bring yours, and we're going to do better than anybody in the United States. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So I think we're in the best position to advocate for changes. When we're put out on the field to play a game with the tools we need, the training we need, the amount of bodies that we need in the sense of full-time workers, I think that there's nothing to fear.
All right. Morgan Wyenn, we're going to come back to you about the environmental challenges. We're talking all about the business aspect and how the port has to adapt and grow. You're looking down the road a decade from now. Do you have confidence the port complex is going to be significantly cleaner than it is or not?
I think 10 years from down the road, yes. I think it will be cleaner. Will it be where we need it to go? I think that depends on leadership of the people up on this panel and the port and state agencies to really put money into where we need to go. You mentioned earlier about, if you live next to a port or an airport, aren't you sort of agreeing to be next to pollution? And I think it's important to note that, this is, like Dave Arian said, this is the U.S. Statutes like the Clean Air Act protect you no matter where you live. So whether you live next to the port or a rail yard or a freeway, you deserve clean air just like anyone else.
I believe that you're going to... I think the next generation of trucks, at least the ones running on the terminal and short drayage trucks, have got to be zero emission, and I think the 2 ports are working on that. And as long as you got the NRDC and the community, the port's going to have no choice except to move forward. Finally, I retired from the Longshore Union in 2009 after 44 years. My final year, I made $75,000 after 44 years. Skewed numbers by the employers, misrepresentation. I wish I made $200,000.
So you just... Yeah, they didn't say everybody did. They said there's significant numbers of people who did, and that half of the full-time workers make $100,000 or more. Do you dispute that?
Yeah,
I dispute it, absolutely.
So you just think they made that number out of whole cloth?
They misrepresent the numbers and how they interpret them, and we can sit down, and I'd love to come on another show, I'm sure Bobby would too, and explain that to the public.
Okay. All right. We need to wrap up our conversation. Let me ask a couple of you just real quickly, particularly the heads of the ports. From Long Beach, Jon Slangerup, do you think you're going to be able to hold off the erosion in market share, or do you think that's not going to be possible for this complex?
I think it's absolutely our mission to grow beyond the market growth. We have grown every year. We continue to grow. We'll grow revenue 7% this coming year. And we will regain our market share growth position because we're going to improve the system to the point where we resume being the best in the entire North American port, family in terms of the ability to move goods through the port.
And Goetz Wolff, UCLA, what do you think the future holds for this complex competitively?
The academic has the advantage of not being directly affected by these consequences. And I think one of the things that we do need to consider is global warming, the extent to which our economies, all economies, in a sense capitalist economies, rely upon consumption. And the question I think that needs to be addressed for, let's say, 50 years from now is, are we going to continue to grow at this same pace? I question the fact whether we really can. And in this sense, I realize that it's a difficult question to address by the people who rely upon this trade.
Yeah. Well, and for everybody who's employed, because if consumption doesn't grow as you're talking about, and our population does, where is the job growth going to come? And that's the
And the question is whether the issue is what type of job growth and what kind of lives we pursue.
I want to thank you all very much. It's been terrific. I've learned so much. Thank you for joining us on our program this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to conclude our radio broadcast portion, but I invite you listening to KPCC to go to kpcc.org because it's going to be AirTalk Overtime. We're going to take questions from members of our audience here at the Queen Mary for our AirTalk 30th anniversary show. That coming up. From all of us at AirTalk, have a great afternoon. All right, thank you, Triv. So we kind of got warmed up. Now we can really get into your questions. And I can't quite see where the microphone is because the lights are a touch bright. Can someone show me where our microphone is?
She has it.
Oh, great. Okay, it is coming to the front. And so Liz is going to be able to take your question. So if you want to ask a question, please stand up, give me your first name, what community you're from. I'd ask you to be as succinct as possible, and that your question be of fairly broad interest, not just, well, where I live, da-da-da-da-da, but something that's gonna have general interest to the listeners and other people that are in the room. And as succinct as you can, we'll get as many as we can. Stand up, please, and we'll take your question. All right. Who would like to go? Right over here? Sir, your first name, where are you from?
Nick, and I'm from Long Beach, lifelong resident.
Terrific. Welcome. Go right ahead.
And I have a little pet issue that I feel passionately about. I look at old photographs of my grandpa, who was a lifeguard on the beach here in Long Beach, and I see the big waves breaking on the beach and all the people enjoying the beach. And I wonder about the breakwater that we have and how necessary it is to the commerce in the port, and whether it's something we could ever consider removing a portion of or all of in order to bring waves and clean water back to Long Beach.
If I'm not mistaken, and you can all correct me or add on, the city of Long Beach commissioned a study to look at the potential impact of removing the breakwater, which I believe was built for the Navy fleet to be here to protect the ships. And because a lot of people would like to see waves come back to Long Beach. Of course, the challenge is you've got all kinds of construction right along the beach, and you've got Naples Island, the peninsula, and places that are comparatively low-lying that could be threatened without the breakwater. But anyone want to weigh in on, does the breakwater have an impact on the ports?
It has absolute impact on the ports, and that breakwater is going nowhere. The reality is that, as you recall, last fall's big storm surge, had that breakwater not been there, there would have been massive damage to the shore, and of course the port itself, the ships at berth, would have been seriously damaged. So, there's no question that we can look at ways to improve the residential side of the breakwater. There are some things we're looking at to mitigate those concerns, but the breakwater itself is essential to to the movement of those ships in and out safely.
And the entirety, the full length of the breakwater is essential?
Well, that's the question. The question is, is there areas that we can modify to affect the tides and the waves? And clearly there is an opportunity to improve by design what's happening at that side.
Because, of course, there's a water quality issue, too, at Long Beach because the LA River dumps out there. I know there's netting and efforts to try and keep debris from coming in, but because there's less circulation inside the breakwater, the water quality is an issue as well.
That's right.
So,
But the breakwater
TL,
is
yeah.
actually a product of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They have jurisdiction over that, and they're working with the city of Long Beach, and I sit on that committee, to figure out what is the future for the breakwater. Are there ways that we can, one, enhance protection of the vessels in the ports while at the same time improving the recreational opportunities for the people in the city of Long Beach? It's an open question, and hopefully the public will weigh in and give us their input on that.
okay, terrific. I'm guessing by a lot of people here, they live in Long Beach and have some concerns about that breakwater going away. Who's next? Please stand up. We'll take the next question. Right here in the back. If you want to pop out to the aisle, yeah, we'll grab you on the aisle right over there. And your first name and where do you live?
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm from Venice.
Great.
And I'm a teacher downtown at a design school. And I often tell my students that they should marry a truck driver because he'll always have a job. So, anyways, but I was wondering, with the new Panama Canal, is there any indication of companies that are diverting their business yet, or is it too early, or they won't tell you, or is anybody worried about Walmart going to Panama Canal and not coming to LA?
Who wants to?
There's
yeah,
significant amount.
Bobby, or did you want yours?
I think one of the concerns that, actually it's not a concern, is you look at the infrastructure on the East Coast. We're able to do here in Southern California is what's called a double stack train. And you'll see these trains running, and it's two containers stacked on top of each other. When you go back east, and I visited some of the ports in the Gulf and back east, the infrastructure and the rail crossings and the rail tunnels won't even provide for double stack trains. So it makes it cost prohibitive for them to take cargo back there because they can only put half the amount of cargo on a train that they can here in Los Angeles, and we're still faster and quicker here in the Port of LA than anywhere in the United States. So
clearly, though, they're building this wider Panama Canal because they think they are going to get significantly more traffic through it. But you think much of that's not coming to the East Coast?
Again, I think Dave made a great point. They're building it for 14,000 TEU ships, and I think Maersk just made a purchase of 21,000 TEU ships. So there's going to come a point where even the canal at its newest is going to become obsolete.
Okay. Someone else wanted to...
Yeah, there's also the issue of the shipping companies and the number of ships they have on particular routes. They're called strings. And the question is how many more ships they really need to maintain this continuing flow of ships arriving perhaps once a week coming from Asia through the through the Panama Canal to the East Coast. By contrast, by coming to Los Angeles or Long Beach or perhaps other places along the coast, they can then transload to either rail or a combination trucking and rail and actually get the containers more quickly to the East Coast than going through the Panama Canal. So there are some time issues, and these companies do not want to have a floating warehouse.
And if I can
Jon Slangerup, you have Long Beach
Port. I want to clarify a couple things. You know, from Asia into the interior of the U.S., the fastest route is through San Pedro Bay. Let me be specific. It takes 12 days of ocean transit to move containers, a large ship of containers across the ocean to Long Beach or Los Angeles. And then it takes about 5 days to move it into the interior of the U.S. So it's about a 17-day transit to say, Chicago or the East Coast. By comparison, if you go through the Panama Canal with the same size ship, it is a 27-day trip. And then you add another number of days on depending on where they're sending it from there. If you come through the Suez Canal from Asia, it's a 37-day transit. So the reality is that as long as we do our job well, we'll always be the cheapest and fastest. And quite frankly, on a spot market today, It costs about $1,800 per container to move it from Asia to Long Beach and Los Angeles. If you move it through the Panama Canal to the East Coast, it's about $4,200. So it is not a sustainable
That
model.
buys you a lot of diesel for the trucks to drive it across the country. That's a big difference.
And there's been bad congestion on the East Coast ports too. New York, New Jersey, Norfolk had terrible congestion. Huge, waiting lines for drivers. There were protests at those ports amongst drivers this year. It's not like everything's all roses and at other ports on the East Coast. They've got their own problems.
We should hear the shipper's perspective, though. TL.
Well, from our perspective, we take the cargo where the owners of the cargo tell us to take it. And I can tell you from surveys that I've done on the Gulf Coast and the East Coast ports, all of those ports are looking at the Panama Canal as an opportunity, and they are trying to modernize and develop and deal with their infrastructure issues so that they can take full advantage of that. It is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
All right, next question. Right down here on the aisle, I see it. Oh, you have someone back there. Okay. I'm sorry, with the bright lights, hard to see. Yes, please. Your first name, where are you from?
I'm Annie. I'm from Long Beach. I have kids and grandkids in Long Beach and family in San Pedro. I want to ask about security at the ports. How do you really know what's in all those containers coming in and then leaving?
Great question. Dave Arian, you want to talk about
Well, the Port of L.A. and the Port of Long Beach, but particularly the Port of L.A., set up a training center, which is the only one really now in the United States that trains people around Homeland Security, not only for the port police, but training all the different agencies that come in around the question of waterside protection for the ports. The screening of containers is done on both sides. I mean, Customs and the U.S. government in many of the countries, whether it's Singapore, Shanghai, or so forth, wherever it's at, has a certain method of determining what's in containers. Here, when it gets to this side, there's a certain amount of screening of what is inside containers.
Can you talk much about that, or is that?
Well, it's public knowledge, but no matter what screening you do, there's always going to be that possibility. And when you look at the Port of LA and you look at the Port of Long Beach as economic entities, they're critical to this country. Therefore, they're a higher target risk, and there's always going to be that. We didn't have to think about that, 20, 30 years ago, but today it's a critical question. We have boats in the water, 2 every day, that are scanning everything underneath the water, anything that may be put there. We have regular security teams in both ports working on a regular basis. You have every agency, every security agency in the United States is coordinating activities in the port, and particularly in these 2 ports.
Airports get threats all the time.
Different kind of threats.
Yeah. Do you get many of those kind of random threats that might not even be credible?
Yeah, we get continual threats. We are both the port complex is a high value target, both for cybercrime as well as physical risk. And we have stood up a massive security apparatus on both sides with hundreds of people and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Our collective security system is the most advanced in the world. It was funded by Homeland Security, and we look out 200 miles and monitor every vessel coming in. Anything that's not identified, we interdict. Everything that we suspect from a cargo standpoint, we inspect. We have massive X-ray systems that these containers go through so we can actually see what's inside. And it goes on. And the fact of the matter is that while it's never perfect, our level of security at the San Pedro Bay complex is extraordinary.
Great.
One other aspect.
Yeah, real briefly, yeah.
There's 10,000 longshoremen and other workers on the waterfront, and many times a container would come in and people would come out of that container, and it was a longshoreman who would identify them because you have 10,000 eyes on the waterfront.
Yes, ma'am. Your first name? Where are you from?
I'm Andrea Cano, and I'm from Seal Beach.
Great.
I teach at LA Harbor College, but I have a quick question to clarify from the last conversation when we were talking about this new Panama Canal that's being built. Is this the one that, are we are they expanding the one that exists, or are they creating a whole new one in Nicaragua, which is something I heard?
It's a different story.
It's a separate set of locks adjacent to the existing locks.
Daniel Ortega hasn't succeeded in Nicaragua yet. He's looking at that Chinese money, but he hasn't got it yet.
It's the same Panama Canal, just
it's in the Panama Canal zone. It's just a separate set of logs adjacent to where the existing logs are.
It's a two-car garage now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, think we have a gentleman back there. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Achim Jung. I work for the Port of Los Angeles.
Great.
And we heard a lot about the concentration process in the shipping industry. We heard that the truckers might join this process, but we still have 2 harbors here in the San Pedro Bay. And are there any developments toward merger? Since we have the new general managers, a number of work groups between the 2 harbors. Is this the first step to a merger, or will that not happen?
Jon Slangerup of Long Beach.
Yeah, it will not happen. And
we're still competing, man.
It's not that that we don't cooperate, because on everything except competition for containers, we cooperate immensely between both ports. The staffs like each other. Gene and I like each other. We work really closely together. We're just not allowed, nor do we want to, eliminate the competitive benefit of working aggressively out there in the marketplace, attracting business to San Pedro Bay. So whenever we lose a container, we know it's going to go to LA and vice versa. And that's exactly how we view the strength. It's like having 1 gas station on the corner versus 2. It's a really healthy competition to have 2 gas stations on the corners.
Isn't the real driver, though, that your city council just wouldn't vote to give up what is a signature asset?
You'd have to
of
bring
the
a
city.
mighty big paycheck to buy us, I could tell you that.
So the politics of that would be very difficult.
And I agree with John.
All right, yes.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm from Los Angeles. My question is about community outreach. You had mentioned that there was historically a lot of tension between the community and the port, which had led to a 7-year stoppage on construction, which led to different strategies that the port used to have outreach to the community. What were the specific events that were catalytic to this change?
Are you talking about the Gateway project with the rail yard in Wilmington, or are you talking about some other aspect of the port?
I guess what would you identify as the specific events that led to different modes of community outreach?
I can kind of answer. I mean, if you're talking about community outreach, so the ILWU has taken huge steps over the past 5 or 6 years. We've gone to 5 different museums and become partners with them. I think it's important for people throughout the Southern California area to understand whether you go to a museum in downtown LA or MOLA right here in Long Beach, when you turn the item over in the gift shop and look at the bottom and it says Made in China, it touched us first. Just today, we brought a class of students from Montebello School District. Special needs kids ranging from kindergarten to the 5th grade. The Port of Los Angeles hosted the boat tour. So we're doing a lot of community outreach. We donate tens of thousands of dollars on a yearly basis. We support the Boys and Girls Club as a platinum sponsor on a yearly basis. We give out scholarships to probably 20 different high schools within the LA Long Beach, Harbor City kind of corridor. So as far as the union and labor, community outreach is huge. Can't expect people to support you if they don't know you.
And I think above and beyond what you're talking about, there's the issue of the environmental impact in communities, the rail yard construction, people in the community very upset because they felt like it's bringing pollution from the port right into Wilmington with the rail yard. And Morgan Wyenn of the NRDC, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I think there's been a series of expansion or growth projects at both ports that create this community tension. And I think the question was, alluding to what was triggering that 7-year time frame of no growth was the China shipping lawsuit, where there is a proposed new, big terminal, and the community was very concerned about the impacts of that. And it turned out that the ports were just simply, or that the port of LA was simply not complying with the California Environmental Quality Act, and that triggered the lawsuit, and it triggered the port really realizing they needed to comply with state law and grow green. And I wish I could say that the problem is solved and there's no tension and everybody's wonderful, but the truth is there's still these projects to grow, and I think the Skig rail yard that you mentioned is exactly a good example of that, where the Port of LA wants to build a new rail yard directly adjacent to the city of West Long Beach, which is a poster child of an environmental justice community where people are overburdened. Study after study shows there's elevated air pollution there. It's a largely minority community, and now they're being told they need to have another pollution source right in their backyard, adjacent to schools and parks and the Villages of Cabrillo Homeless Services Center. And so I think this tension is still there. I meet often with the ports. I think we have a great relationship and open lines of communication, but there's still big gaps in terms of what the community wants from the port.
Let me just follow up, though. Is NRDC suing over the rail yard, or is that legally resolved at this point?
Yes, we are suing, and it is not legally resolved. It's an ongoing lawsuit.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to the lawsuit.
Dave Arian?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to the lawsuit, but the reality is when we negotiated the contract with BNSF for the skid yard, I made sure that there was a provision in there that said that when zero-emission trucks technology is available, they will be implemented for all trucks running to and from that rail yard, which will be historical. We've been experimenting the two ports now for nearly 6-7 years with zero-emission trucks. We're getting closer and closer. Within that contract, and the importance of a contract, is that it's not up to BNSF whether they do it, it's up to the Port Commission. In other words, we're the ones that makes that determination. Once the technology is available, they will implement zero-emission trucks.
BNSF, the railroad that's
everything running to and from. Now, and that begins to change everything in terms of zero-emission trucks running by these communities.
Morgan Wyenn, I wanted to ask you, though, about the claim that this yard will overall decrease pollution, trucks aren't going to be sitting as long, and that there's going to be a net benefit. Do you disagree with that contention, or do you see that point but see that the burden still is going to be disproportionately paid by this West Long Beach community?
I disagree with that contention 100%. And it's not just NRDC, it's the Southern California Air Quality Management District, the City of Long Beach, the Long Beach School District. There's many parties that are in this lawsuit that all agree that the environmental analysis the Port of LA did just simply is incorrect. It's really long and it's really big, but it's very simple of what it says, and it's incorrect. It has this false idea that there'll be moving trucks from the Hobart rail yard, which is further inland, down to here for the Skig facility near West Long Beach. And the reality is we're not moving the rail yard. We're going to have 2 rail yards. So the number of trucks, the amount of pollution is going to double, not be cut in half.
Because of growth, you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
See, and I think the thing that the environmentalists ignore is that particular provision and how the ports are moving today to zero-emission trucks. If you introduce 1.2 million drays with a zero-emission trucks versus 1.2 million today with, diesel trucks, it will reduce pollution.
How many years do you think that's?
Well, I'm hopeful in the next 2 to 3 years, that technology will be proven. And if it is, I'm sure the NRDC and everybody else will say, right on, you did the right thing. Right now, they have a right to challenge because it hasn't been proven.
Morgan, how long do you think it's going to take?
I think that there could be 100% zero-emission trucks by 2020. I think the problem is that both ports have been just refusing to commit to that. And I mean, that provision that Dave Arian mentions is in there, but the problem is if the ports were so confident in this technology, then just require it right now, not just for the Skig rail yard project, but for all the port terminal projects, require zero-emission trucks, and then everyone will know that's coming, but they failed to do that.
I think I think there's some wrong data here. Yeah. Let's first not ignore what's happened. Let's not ignore what progress has been made, because it's been phenomenal improvements. In the 10 years since the Port of Long Beach introduced the Green Port policy and began implementing fundamental changes in the way we do and build everything, we have dropped diesel particulate matter since 2005 baseline by 82%. I mean, that's a massive reduction. We look at the state regulations and goals in terms of air quality, and we look at every single milestone, and we build all of our plans to hit those milestones. We're already hitting the 2023 attainment numbers with what we've done in Long Beach. You know, we've reduced the sulfur oxides by 90%. Like I said, the diesel particulates 82%. The NOx, which is a significant part, we've reduced almost 52%, and it continues to improve. We have a zero emission vision, and in fact, it's articulated and will be articulated in the third version of our Clean Air Action Plan. We are investing millions of dollars in all the technologies that are zero emission, including trucks, and as well as everything related to the water.
All right.
If I may.
Tia.
As the ports like to say, when it suits them, they neither own nor operate the trucks. My members do, or the equipment. And we have made the investment to replace the previous generations of equipment with the cleanest equipment that's available. That happens to be diesel today. The next generation that we're looking forward to is electrified. And we are looking forward to it because there is nothing more efficient than an electric motor. We see the inherent advantages of this, and we want to embrace this and make this transition, but it is going to be an exceedingly expensive and difficult transition to make. And I would love to tell you the technology is there today, but it just isn't. We have to make a bigger effort to bring these technologies to the marketplace.
Well, it sounds like the electrical grid is, I mean, if you're going to go zero emission, all electric vehicles, you're going to have to redo this grid, right?
We believe so. We believe that the reliability of the grid is paramount if this is going to work.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and, okay. Yeah, we can take two more. Is there someone? Yeah, we'll take two more. Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Stacy, and I live in Long Beach. Just to be honest, it was difficult to watch the strike and see what was happening in the line of ships. It certainly was a blemish for our city. I think right when it was over, a governor from Florida came in to woo business. And now that it's over, I'm sure everyone's getting along real well and everything. Did we learn a lot from that, and can we don't expect anything like that anytime soon. We benefited from it, right?
Let me answer that really clearly, and so you guys can hear me. The ILWU has not been on strike since 1972. Okay? In 2002, we were locked out by our employers. Gates were shut. This time around, the employers took unilateral action to cancel the night shift, while our workers were at the dispatch hall waiting to go to work. So let's be very clear. The ILW did not, has not, and in the foreseeable future will not go on strike. I think that the process of negotiations, it was long, but we needed patience. And we saw as the ships built up, it wasn't a byproduct of negotiations. It was a direct byproduct of the employers and the marine terminals shutting their gates down.
And didn't they do that, though, because your workers engaged in a slowdown?
Absolutely not. We can show with the numbers that there was no slowdown. What the employers pointed at was the lack of certified crane operators. So we have people that can drive a car, but they don't have a driver's license. Do you want them on the freeway with your kids? No, you do not. So with the crane operators, we're lifting 40-ton containers from cab heights that exceed 165 feet, and we needed trained operators. The employer had spent the last 5 years with minimal training, and the training that our guys were getting, the crane training I received 15 years ago was the same crane training we were doing today. The crane training that was going on when David got crane trained was still the same crane training that was going on today.
So what was the incentive then for the employers to cancel the night shift?
Purely propaganda in my eyes. We know that we had to unload the cargo. As the ships built up,
But they could just keep operating with contractual limbo indefinitely, right?
I think they planned on the public seeing ships sitting offshore and creating a panic, a false panic. If they would have just stayed at the table, invested the amount of time and effort that they took with public relations firms and the millions of dollars that they spent on propaganda and spin, I think if they would have spent that time at the table, hammering out a contract, we would have been done months earlier.
Anybody want to disagree with that?
And let me make one last point before somebody does, is I think we have to be proud here in the Port of LA and Long Beach, because what we identified with the problem with the crane training, what came out of negotiations was two things. One, we didn't prepare for peak. We're going to be getting ready to hire for the first time in 7 years. We've had casuals languishing at a casual hall for 7 years. We're getting ready to bring some in. And the most important thing is the Port of LA and Long Beach will now share the most modern and technologically advanced crane training program in the United States. We'll be in the top 3 in the nation. We'll be putting out crane operators that are going to be the best in the nation, bar none.
Very good. Anyone? No one wants to?
I still get my pension from the LW.
All right.
PMA.
All right. I think, do we have one more? Oh, okay. Very good. Yes, sir.
Hi, Larry. My name's Adrian. I come from Guat, so there's not much port activity there. But nonetheless, it is a very important asset to our region. And I want to know how every panelist brought a unique perspective, but how can we stress the fact that the port and our infrastructure overall is a matter of national interest? Because obviously listening to AirTalk and NPR in general, we see this resurgence in China's ability to try to increment their soft power through the rail that they're trying to do in Latin America, the canals, and God knows how many other infrastructure projects they're taking on abroad. So who do we need to talk to, or how does it need to be framed so that the nation and the general public can get behind the infrastructure development needed in the port and in the country in general?
Yeah,
Dave Arian. I think we got their attention. First, we got their attention because of the big ships and the backup, and secondly, the dispute that developed during bargaining intensified. It created a crisis in this country. The BCOs, which are the targets of Walmart's, the others, everybody saw the importance of the port in a different way. 30 years ago, if you went to Washington, D.C., which I did and lobbied, we were, out of 50 issues legislation was dealing with, the ports were 48th or 49th. Now they're in the top 5. People are paying attention to the ports now more than ever before because of the lifeline of the economy for this country. So I think people just have to stay focused on that. And I think finally, with crisis comes opportunity, and it's our opportunity now to make a difference.
You even got a member of the presidential cabinet to come out and take part in the negotiations here. So that shows the priority.
I think there's another issue, though, because the person speaking is absolutely right. This is a critical asset. And when you look at infrastructure in the United States, the big problem is that because of the priorities and the investments that the United States is making, the country really has had to give up on infrastructure development in this country. We are literally $3.5 trillion behind on planned projects in the United States for infrastructure, including roads and including ports. And so it's left the burden on the ports to pick up the slack. I know our port is currently in the middle of a $4.5 billion investment in port infrastructure, and LA is not far behind that. And combined, we absolutely eclipse everyone else in the United States in terms of capital investment, and all of that's coming out of our earnings. All of it's coming out of our debt creation, and there is no meaningful money coming out of Washington for that. If you really want to make a difference, talk to your congressman and say, listen, what are you doing about infrastructure in general, and what are you doing specifically about infrastructure for trucks and for our ports? And I think you can, they need to be heard.
I want to thank you all again very much for taking part. This has been terrific. Learned so much. Thank you for coming out this evening to the Queen Mary, and thank you for joining us tonight. This has really been interesting. And I hope you'll come join us for some of our AirTalk 30th anniversary events. We'll be in North Hollywood at another historic space, the El Portal Theater, coming up in July. We have other events in Redlands, Santa Barbara, 2 Orange County events. So we hope that you'll come join us for some of the others. Thank you again for coming out. Drive safely, and it's always a pleasure to see you. Good night.